The matzah clogs the. Okay. Good evening. Hope you're all well. Today we're learning Maseches Makkos Daf Tes Zayin, and we're starting 4 lines down. V'tarvaihu ali b'der Yehuda. We had just learned about a machlokes, multiple cases actually, but if you look back just a couple of lines, there's a machlokes in the Amoraim. If a person makes a shiur that they're going to eat a certain amount of bread before the night falls, and they don't, so both Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish agree that there is no malchus. The only question is why. According to Rabbi Yochanan, he says it's because it was a lav shein bo ma'isa, and according to Rish Lakish, it is not because of that, but rather because he holds that it's a hasra suffix. So that's machlokas, and he holds that hasra suffix is lo shema hasra. But either way, they hold that in that case, let's get the case super clear, because then we're going to dig into why they hold what they hold. If I were to make a neder that I hereby commit to eating a loaf of bread before 10 p.m. tonight, and then I don't do that, everyone agrees there's no malchus. The only question is why. Yochanan says it's a lav shein bo ma'isa. You can't get a lav on not doing anything. You can't get the malchus on not doing anything. What? Still a lav. No, for Pashut it's a lav. We're only talking about the onish. You did something wrong. You did a lav. You made a shvuah, and you didn't fulfill your shvuah. It's an isur deraisa. But you don't get the onish of malchus. Masha ein kain, according to Reish Lakish, he says it's because the hasra wasn't a vadai. Why not? Because what were you giving the warning on? Make sure to eat the food. But that warning is not don't kill the person and then you kill them. Make sure you don't eat the food is I have no idea if you will or won't eat the food. It is inaction. And therefore he holds that it actually is somewhat similar in Lumdus, because lav she'ein bo ma'isa, but the hasra is shaky. So they're similar, but that's what they hold. Where do they each get their respective shitas from? V'tarvaihu, this is where we pick up today. V'tarvaihu ali b'der Yehuda. Titania, as we saw on Erev Pesach Mamish in the afternoon, when we read this pasuk the first time in this Masechta, it says in regards to the Korban Pesach, v'lo sosir mimenu ad boker. There's your lo saseh. Don't let the Korban Pesach last until morning. And here's the corrective measure. V'hanosar mimenu ad boker. What is it? Bo'esh tisaref? Bo'esh tisrofu. It should be burned. That's an aseh that follows a lo saseh. Lav hanitak le'aseh, as we would say in our language. And how does the Brisa teach this pasuk? V'hakasav litein aseh achar lo saseh lomar shein loken alav divrei Rabbi Yehuda. So, Rabbi Yehuda says that based on our pasuk of lo sosir mimenu ad boker, the isra of nosar, he says we have an aseh following a lo saseh, what we would call a lav hanitak le'aseh, and he says that in that particular case, that ein loken alav. So, what does Rabbi Yochanan hold? What did we say about Rabbi Yochanan? Rabbi Yochanan would have said that in our case, he said it's he holds that lav she'ein bo ma'isa, that ein aloka. Let's see how Rabbi Yochanan understands Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yochanan da'ikachi. Rabbi Yochanan infers from what Rabbi Yehuda said in the following way. Taima, the reason why in the Brisa of lo sosir mimenu ad boker that it's ein loken is only because the bahakasuv, only because the pasuk made an exclusion. However, lo bahakasuv, if there was no pasuk, then I would have said loka. Alma. So therefore, if Yochanan says hasra safek shma hasra, he therefore says that it must be that hasra safek is shma hasra. And Rish Lakish has an exact opposite view. Rish Lakish di'ekachi. He says, Taima de ba'akasuf. The only reason why Rav Yehuda said that there's no malchus in the pasuk is because of the fact that the pasuk presented the way that it did. Because as the Brisa said, ba'akasuf litein aseh. However, halo ba'akasuf lo ke'alma lav she'ein bo ma'isa lo kenalav. They were making diukim. And they both made very reasonable diukim. The svara of lav she'ein bo ma'isa and hasra safek shma hasra or lo shma hasra, those are very reasonable things to say, right? Let's go back to our case that we started with. Remember, the case from yesterday. If I make a shua that I'm going to eat bread by 10 p.m. and then I don't, We all agree that there's no Makkos. Why are there no Makkos? I understand both svaras. But Rav Yochanan dug in on his, which is Lav Shein Bo Maisa, and Reish Lakish dug in on his of Hasra Safek. Why did they each hold the way that they did? Reish Lakish, Rav Shimon ben Lakish Nami. Why don't you agree with the shita of why don't you agree with the shita of Rav Yochanan? After all, Havadai Hasra Safek, who is definitely a case of Hasra Safek. So says the Gemara, I can't say Hasra Safek Shema Hasra. Why not? Because Savar La Ki Idach Tana de Rabbi Yehuda. There's another brisa of Rabbi Yehuda which says differently. Tanya. Let's talk about a case scenario, and the Rishonim explain what's going on in this case. This is a Gemara that can be found in Yevamos. I'm sure we fondly remember it. I do not. I just want to say clearly, I don't remember anything about this Gemara that we're about to learn. Nothing. Flat line. So what was the case? The case was where a woman was married. Her husband died or got divorced, and normally we have a restriction that a woman cannot marry within 3 months. Why? Because then we're not sure whose baby she has if she has a baby at the 9-month mark. Did she have the baby from the first husband full pregnancy 9 months? Or did she have a shorter pregnancy of 7 months from the new husband? We don't know. So she didn't wait, and Ruvain is born. Okay. Now Ruvain does the following. Here's what the Brisa says, the Tanya. He hits the original father, and he also hits the new father. He's hit both of them, but he hit them separately. Kilel zeh v'chazer v'kilel zeh. He hit the first father and the first husband, and he cursed the first husband, and he also cursed the second husband. He kashneim b'vas achas, or he hit them both at the same time. O kilel shneim b'vas achas, or cursed them both at the same time. This shita holds chayiv. That's the Tanakama. What does Rabbi Yehuda hold? It depends. Rabbi Yehuda Omer b'vas achas chayiv. I agree. If you hit them both at the same time, there's no question that you're going to be chayiv. However, listen to this. If Ruvain, the son born without knowing who his father is, if Ruvain were to hit first the initial husband and then the second husband, again, we don't know which one is his father, then he's pater. So why is he pater? It must be that in a case like this, it's hasra safek. Because if I were Ruvain and I was warned, Phil, don't hit your father, whoever your father may be, and then I hit person number 1, and then I subsequently hit person number 2, and I got hasra both times. But I'm not sure who you are, my father. I'm not sure if you're my father or if you're my stepfather. I have no idea. So therefore, you're pater, which means by definition, according to Rabbi Yehuda, he must hold hasra safek is lo shma hasra. Safek on who you're hitting. Don't say lav shem b'maisa. This brisa doesn't talk about lav shem b'maisa. So therefore, Rabbi Yehuda over here clearly holds that hasra safek is lo shma hasra. That's why Reish Lakish dug in. That's why he didn't want to agree with the opinion of Rav Yochanan, which throws the question right back to Rav Yochanan. The Rav Yochanan, Nami, Havadai Lav Shein Bo Maisahu. Obviously, in our case of Lo Sosir Mimeno Ad Boker, you didn't do anything wrong. Same with the case of Shvua She'ochel Kikar Zehayom. You were passive in your Avera. So why did you read Rabbi Yehuda that way? Because Savar La Kiha de Amar Rav Idi Bar Avin, Amar Rav Amram, Amar Rav Yitzchak, Amar Rav Yochanan. And then all of this in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, who is a quote in the name of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Mishum Rabbi Yossi Aglili, Kol lo sa'aseh shebatorah, lav sheyesh bo ma'isa lo ken alav, lav she'ein bo ma'isa ein lo ken alav. Rabbi Yehuda himself lays down the law, and he says what it is, lav she'ein bo ma'isa. So then, with that brisa in mind, Reish Lakish, Rabbi Yochanan, looks at the case that he sees above, the case of nosar, where the way you create nosar is by sitting on your couch and doing nothing. And he says, that's not because of Asra Safek. Rabbi Yehuda has an express brisa that says, Alav shein bo ma'isa, ein lo ken alav. Now, there are exceptions, even according to Rabbi Yehuda, chutz. Where do we say that there's a lav shein bo ma'isa, but there are malkos? Chutz min hanishba, umamir, which is when someone trades kedusha when they shouldn't, v'hamakala l'schaveru b'shem. So that's why each of the shitas, Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, they each have a solid ground to stand on. The only problem is that while that's true, we just presented brisas all in the name of Rabbi Yehuda that flip-flop across the map. The first brisa was the brisa of Nosar. And all he said was, Balitain aseh achar losa aseh lomar she'ein loken alav divrei Rabbi Yehuda. The second brisa was the brisa of the possible father, and there it was a little bit cryptic, but Rabbi Yehuda seemed to say very clearly that hasra safek is lo shma asra. And then we had this third brisa that was explicit about lav she'en bo ma'aseh yet again. These three brisas don't fit with one another. So says the Gemara halfway down, 4 lines before the wide lines, kasha Rabbi Yehuda ad Rabbi Yehuda. You have to make good on all the brisas, and it's a little confusing to understand. So says the Gemara, either Reb Shimon ben Lakish. Reb Shimon ben Lakish is of the opinion of safek hasra, lo shma hasra. So according to him, it has to be Trei Tanoi Libud Rabbi Yehuda. It has to be 2 Talmidim of Rabbi Yehuda who misunderstood. One understood one way, one understood another. That's the only way for Reb Shimon ben Lakish to have a real shita. And either Rav Yochanan, who has one brisa that seems to show Lav Shein Bo Ma'aseh Ein Lo Ken Alav, and another that shows the opposite. Don't worry, Hadidei Hadirabbe. One is of his own opinion, that's Rabbi Yehuda, and one is of his Rebbe's opinion, which is Rabbi Yossi Aglili, which refers to this final brisa that we learned just a few lines ago. And end of the sugya. So basically, the shitas of Rav Yochanan and Reish Lakish, the ones that hold of Safek Hasra, Shma Safek, Safek Hasra, Lo Shma Safek, and whether or not we employ the rules of Lav Shein Bo Ma'aseh Lo Ken Alav or Ein Lo Ken Alav, these sugyas are intertwined deeply, and they learn all of their shitas respectively, Rav Yochanan and Reish Lakish, from the world of Rabbi Yehuda. Let's talk about other cases of lav she'ein bo of lav hanitak le'aseh, or what we would call lav hanitak le'aseh. Tanan Hasam, we have a Mishnah over there. Where's over there? In Maseches Chulin. Hanotel aim al banim. If there is someone who takes the mother bird and they take the eggs, they made a mistake. It should be shaleach tishalach es ha'ein ve'es habonim tikach lach. It says the Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Loke ve'eno meshalech. Rabbi Yehuda says, if somebody takes the mother bird, they get Makkos. They did a lav. And ve'eno meshalech, and don't send away the mother bird now. You've lost your window. V'chachamim omer meshalech ve'eno loke. And the chachamim say, send the mother bird away. You always have a tikkun. You could always send the mother bird away. And says the Gemara, Ze'aklal, here is the general rule. Kol mitzvahs lo sa'aseh, sheyesh ba kumaseh. If there is a lo sa'aseh, which is that we should not, which is that we should send the mother bird away. You're not allowed to take it with the mother bird. But there's also a kumaseh, which is that you can send away the mother bird. Ein chayavan aleha, we don't give malkos to that person. And Amar Rav Yochanan, and this is where things get a little challenging, and we're going to dig into some possibilities here. Ein lanu elazos ve'od acheres. We only have this case and no other case. Namely, where Rabbi Yehuda says that we are going to give malkos, there's only one other case like that, where we have an aseh that follows a lo saseh, where we still give malkos. We have Rabbi Yehuda over here by hanotel aim es al habanim, and Amar Rabbi Lazar heicha. What's the other halacha? So he tells his Talmud, I'm not helping you. Amar le l'chi tishkach, go out and find it. You find the other case. And in fact, the student went and he grabbed the Gemara and dak v'ashkach, and he found the next case where there is still malkos after an aseh that follows a los aseh. What is that case? It is a case we saw just yesterday, or the day before, yesterday actually. The case is ones shegiresh. We know that if a man violates a woman, the halacha is that he should be available to marry her, and he's never allowed to leave her. Now, if he left her, doesn't that mean that there's a corrective measure? So let's see. Im Yisrael hu machzir ve'eno loke. If he's a Yisrael, since a Yisrael is allowed to marry a grusha, the Yisrael always has a way to solve this problem. So, Ruvain violates Rachel, and they're married now, or they get married, I should say. Then they get divorced when they shouldn't have. That's Aser. But because he's a Yisrael, he can always go back to her in front of Edom. Harad mekudesh b'tabazu kedas Moshe v'Yisrael. Problem solved. But that's only true if you're Yisrael. However, V'im Koinu were 2/3 of the way down, 6 lines, 5 lines into the wide lines, then Loke be'ena machzir. And this is our second case where we see Alav hanitak le'aseh, where we still have Malkos. It's the case of Ones with a Kohen, similar to the case of Rabbi Yehuda that we saw earlier by the Loke ve'enu meshaleach with the case of Shiluach HaKan. Says the Gemara, I understand that there's Malkos, Hani Chalaman Datani Kaimo Velo Kaimo. I understand that there could be Malkos in a case where he was given a window of time to do the assay by Bezdin and he didn't do it. Elulaman Datani Bitlo Velo Bitlo. But in the case where he just always had an open-ended window to do that particular commandment, so then Bishlam Agabe Shiluach Hakan Mishkachas Lo. I could understand a case of bitlo velo bitlo, where really he can choose to do the action or inaction. Where would we have a case where there's still malkos? Where you can kill the animal. And then if you kill the mother bird, well, you can't send it away. And if you can't send it away, now you no longer have an opportunity, and therefore you'd be chayiv malkos. So I understand, says the Gemara, that there's precedence to say that there would be malkos in a case of the lav hanitak le'aseh of shiluach hakan, where the person picked up the bird along with the eggs, which was usher, and then he killed the bird. Then you can't send away the mother bird, and you be chayiv malkos. I understand. Ella ones, but in the case where Ruvain violates Rachel, bitlo velo bitlo hechi mishkachasla. What is the case where he can redo the assay? Where he can, what is the case, according to the shita of bitlo velo bitlo, hechi mishkachasla, if it's up to him to remarry her, so then when would he be chayiv malkos? Ide kotla, if he were to have killed her, and then they can't remarry, and then he'd be chayiv malkos, well then he won't be chayiv malkos because kamle b'derabamine. And that therefore poses a difficult question for us, which is, you want to say that ones is one of the cases that it's a lav hanitak la'aseh where there's still a case to be malkos. Says the Gemara, according to the approach of bitlo velo bitlo, where the person has to choose when they do that final action of remarrying, the ones shagiresh, that he has to choose to remarry. What's the case where there's malkos there if you hold bitlo velo bitlo, that it's totally up to him? So says the Gemara, 10 lines from the bottom, Amar of Simi mechozna, kigon shekibe la kedushin me'acher. Ruvain, let's get the flow of events clear. Ruvain violates Rachel. Ruvain marries Rachel. Ruvain divorces Rachel. And then Ruvain is the shadchan for Rachel to marry somebody else. And now Ruvain sets up Rachel with Shimon. And now Shimon and Rachel are happily married. So says the Gemara, that the case is where Reuven was a shadchan, and therefore in that case, now that Shimon is married to Rachel, who was the woman that Reuven had violated, now that that's true, he can no longer marry her, and because he can no longer marry her, so therefore, it's a lav hanitak la'aseh, where we have a chiyuv malkos. So says the Gemara, still that doesn't work. Amarav, shivise shliach. If the woman is the one who said, if Rachel said to Ruvain, please accept kiddush, what a messed up scenario, right? Ruvain violates Rachel. This is actually what happened to me at a circumcision I did today, which was kimat the same sugya. I'll tell you the mice in a second. Hold on. One story at a time. Let's first learn Torah. I got your attention. So in this case, Ruvain marries Rachel. In this case, Ruvain violates Rachel and marries her and divorces her. He now has the asay portion of remarrying her. Instead, if Rachel says, hey, by the way, really cute guy down the block, can you please accept Kedushin from Shimon on my behalf? Ishavise shliach, if she makes Reuven a shliach, then ihi kamevat laleh. That's not him being mevatel, which is an interesting lamdus. I don't know why that's true. It's her being mevatel. And ilo shvise shliach, and if he didn't make her into a shliach, if she didn't make him into a shliach, kol kemine, does that even work? Below klumhi, he can't accept kedushin for her without her knowledge. So let's finish the case, and then I'll tell you a brief story of what happened today. Ela amar of simi minahar da You're 100% right, but it's where he made a public neder that he would have no hana from her at all, and he made it in public. What happened today? I went down, not a Yiddish family. I would like to say kamuvan. I hope it's true. I was none the wiser. Nice to meet you. This is my baby. Wonderful. Let's set up for the circumcision. And I said, oh, I see you have an older son. She said, yes, that's my son that I had with my previous partner, right? And that's a picture of him on the wall in my house. The father. There's two couples, this woman and her new husband, and the father of the older child with his new wife. So the man that she had a baby with out of wedlock before she got married, they hang out all the time. They babysit for each other's kids, but it's very odd. I'm happy that they're comfortable and all.
As soon as you mention your almost, that's what happens.
I know. You gotta tie. I couldn't even express to her like these are sugyas and shas. These are like can you still say yichud, libo gaspa? It's not. Well, let's just say she wasn't a Yiddish Mädel in any way, shape, or form. So, okay, so says the Gemara, that's the case over here where we actually do have Makkos by the case of One. So now the concluding case, or I should say where we're up to now, Ruvain violates Rachel, Ruvain marries Rachel, Ruvain divorces Rachel, and right after that he goes in public and he's mudar hana, that in public that he'll never have any hana from her, then he's chayav Makkos. Says the Gemara, that also doesn't work. This is true according to the Shita that holds neder shehuda barabim ein lo hafara. That's true for those who hold that there's no hafara when you're hudar barabim. Yesh lo hafara, but not everyone holds that if you do a public mudar hana that you can't recant, because there are shitas that say you can. And if that's true, then where are your malkos in the case of ones? It says the Gemara, the Medira, he was Madir Hana against her, but it was Aldas Rabim. It was in accordance with Bezdin. And that would be the difference between them. So therefore, if it's done by Rabim, then if he does that, then he's going to be Chayiv Malkos. To Amar Amimar teaches Hilchasa, we have a halacha. Neder Shehudar Barabim Yesh Lo Afara. If a person is Madir Hana against a particular item or person, just in general in public, there can be hafara. But al das rabim, if it's done al pi bezdin, if it's done in front of bezdin or al pi bezdin, then ein lo hafar. So that's what the Gemara concludes. We have our case scenario now. We have two cases. We have the case of hanotel eim al banim. That's one case of a lav hanita klase where there can still be malkos. And the second case where that's true is the case we were just discussing, where Ruvain violates Rachel, marries her, divorces her, and then he's Madir Hana al Pi Bezdin. In that case, there would also be Malkos. Says the Gemara, V'suleka. There are no other cases like that. Look at Rashi. Rashi says, V'suleka, mitzvahs lo saseh, sheyesh bakumase, dilil kiela, which is what we've been discussing. Is there a case scenario where there's a lav hanita klase, a lo sase, followed by a corrective measure, but still you'd get malkos? We have our two, which is the case of shiluach hakan and ones, but aren't there any more? The Gemara says v'ha'ika, and the simon is gezel, mashkon, upeya. Gezel, that should be a case scenario like that. Rachman amar lo sigzel v'heshiv hesagzela, but let's say I burn the gzela, and now I can't return it anymore. So maybe we should say there's malkos. And mashkon, what about collateral? De Rachmana Amar lo savo el beso la'avot avoto. That sometimes we have a case scenario where we restrict someone from oppressing the person that they lent to, and the pasuk says that if you do take something from him as collateral, hashev tashiv lo ha'avot kivo hashemesh, you should give it back. Umishkachas la bekaimo v'lo kaimo bitlo v'lo bitlo. And we can come up with various cases, which is what the Gemara is hinting to, that we can come up with cases where you, you burn the item that was the mashkon, you burn the item that you stole. So why in these cases would there never be malkos? There are lav hanita klase, then there's no malkos. Why? Why can't we work hard to come up with a case like we did in the Ones case? So says the Gemara, a clever answer. Hasam, 2 lines from the bottom. Hasam, kevan dechayv b'tashlumen, ein lokem mishalem. Because in the case of Gezel and Mashkon, it's not just that you did a lav. You owe them money. It's not just that, like, when you violate a woman, right? So then you need malkos for what you did. That's what's happening. But over here, by the money, you owe a tashlumin. Even if the item was burnt, you still need to pay back. So that's why there's no Malkos, because the Tashlumin takes its place. So it's Ein Loke Umeshale. What?
Isn't there Knas in-
Mm-hmm.
Does Knas and Makkos?
Mm-hmm. By Ones? Ones is Loke Umeshale. I think we saw that yesterday. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's true. So it says the Gemara, Maskif lo Reb Zera, Ha'ika mashkono shel ger v'meis hager. Says the Gemara, let's say that I do something wrong and I take a mashkon, which I shouldn't have done, and I was going to give it back the next day, but the ger died, and because he's a ger, he has no family members, and then I have no one else to give it back to, and then I owe no tashlumin. Perhaps that should be a case where there's a mashkon. Why wasn't that case included? It says the Gemara, turning to the top of Hes Zion Amud Beis. Hasam Gavra Bar Tashluminhu. There, be'etzem, you really are a Bar Tashlumin. You really do owe money. The Shibuda de Gerhu de Kapaka. But the person to whom you're supposed to pay is no longer able to be paid. But there is this cloud over you, which means you're a Bar Tashlumin. And if there was ever a long lost relative, you'd have to give that long lost relative the money. There isn't one, but this is a fascinating lumdus. Even though the guy doesn't exist anymore, there still is this idea that you owe money. So therefore we say there's no Malkos in such a case. Very interesting. Va'ika Peya, says the Gemara, wait 1 second, I can come up with a case of Peya. The Rachmana Amar lo sichale pe'as, you should not cut the corners. And le'ani v'lager ta'azov osam. The mishkachas lo b'kaimo v'lo kaimo, and bitlo v'lo bitlo. We can come up with cases where we can say that the lav is lo sichale, the aseh is le'ani v'lager ta'azov osam, and in a whole host of cases we can come up with a case that you're not going to be able to fulfill the asay, and maybe we should say there's Malkos. The Tanya, 5 lines down on Tezayin with base. Mitzvah's peah lahafresh min hakama. The mitzvah of peah is to be mafresh from the kama, from the stalks. Lo hifresh min hakama, mafresh min ha'omarin. That if you don't take it from the stalks, then when they're all bundled up in the sheaves, that's when you should do the hafrasha. Lo hifresh min ha'omar and mafresh min akri. If you don't take it from there, you should take it from the next stage of preparation. Ad shalom mireach. But all of that is only prior to the smoothing out of the kri. Mircho, then me'aser v'nosein lo. But then at that point, you can no longer give the payah. So at that point, you should be chayav malkos because you can no longer do the asay. So says the Gemara, I can wriggle out of that. Great question, but I can wriggle out of it. Kid Rabbi Shmuel, the Amar af mafresh mina isa. There's never a breaking point where you can't be mafresh. My wife asked me to braid some challahs a couple weeks ago. More than a couple weeks ago, I keep Pesach. So 3 weeks ago, she asked me to so okay, so the dough was already made. I took it out and I started braiding the challah. She asked me afterwards, were you mafresh? I'm like, no. Well, I don't know. Just did you tell me to be mafresh? Like, I'm not in charge of the kitchen. I didn't know if she was. It didn't even cross my mind. I for sure thought she did. It didn't even cross my mind. So we were mafresh afterwards. So that's Rabbi Shmuel. We actually paskin like Rabbi Shmuel that af mafresh mina isa. So therefore, the asay of hafrasha applies whenever it's the case, even if after it's baked, according to some poskim. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Shmuel Nami, even according to him, mishkachas la isa. Let's say I ate the bread and it's all gone. So now we have our case, says the Gemara, where peya is actually a great example because I cannot be mafresh, even according to Rabbi Shmuel, after I consume the food. Says the Gemara, you're 100% right. Elazos ve'od acheres. Aha. Says the Gemara, you're right. This case, peya, is also one of those cases. Aval ones lo, we're swapping out. We're only going to say the case of shiluach hakan and peya. Aval ones lo. Dehecha amrinan al das rabim ein lo hafara. When is it that we say that al das rabim a person doesn't do hafara? That's true. L'dvar rishus. Aval l'dvar mitzvah yesh lo hafara. This is beautiful. The Gemara says you no longer have a case scenario of malkos in ones. Let's review. We had said on the bottom of Tes Zayin Amud Aleph that the case of ones, where it was a lav hanitak la'aseh with malkos, looked like this. Ruvain violated Rachel. Ruvain married Rachel. Ruvain divorced Rachel, and then Ruvain was madir hana from Rachel in front of Bezdin. So the Gemara says over here, even though it was in front of Bezdin, When do we say there's no hafara when you're madir hana in front of bezdin? That's the dvar rishus. But aval the dvar mitzvah yesh lo hafara, and therefore there's never going to be malkos in the case of ones. And the Gemara now tells a story, quarter of the way down. Kiha da'ahu mikri dardiki. There was someone who was a reader to children. He was a rebbe. He was a very good teacher. To have a pasha bianuka, he would hit the kids a little too much. Rashi says to have a pasha bianuka, 15 lines down in Rashi. Make osam yoser midai. I don't think that would fly in the ATT umbrella system. What?
It was the quantity. It was.
Yeah. It wasn't if.
It wasn't the concept. Right?
It wasn't the concept.
That's what I was trying to say.
It wasn't if. It was just how much. So here, this Rebbe was removed from his post because he hit the kids 10 times instead of 9, whatever their threshold was. But Adri Bey Ravacha put him back in the post. I'm sorry, Adri Bey Ravacha. Rav Ada was Madir Hana. This person, I hereby make a neder that whatever. And then Vahadri Ravini brought him back. There we have a case where there was Mudar Hana, but he was the best Rebbe. Okay, he's abusive, but he's the best Rebbe. Okay, so someone's going to take this clip and be like, our past ATT CEO. But this is ridiculous because our culture, we're not like this, obviously. Nothing to do with today, Pasha. But in a previous door, this was taka true. Oh. But that's tsaros. That like what happened in the 70s and 80s, even here in town, like we weren't happy about it. It wasn't lechatchila. In the Gemara, it's like a rodes beno for the sake of chinuch. Like our Rebbe was maket talmidah. We saw this a couple of blot ago. That was the standard. Says the Gemara. Amar, we had said in the Mishnah that you're going to get malkos. So let's get into some of those halachic sugyas. A short little section here, third of the way down. Amar Yehuda, Haiman da'achal binisa debei karba. If you ate a worm from cabbage, malkinan le mishum sheretz hashoretz al haaretz, you get malkos. Hu da'achal binisa debei karba. There was a particular person who ate this worm. Then nagde Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda taka did give him malkos. This Rav Yehuda is the Amora, which is just fascinating. They were giving Malkos in the early parts of the Amora, and we saw this already in Shas, that at that time, even though it wasn't a time of the Beis HaMikdash, Malkos seemed to have still applied. Maybe it wasn't a fulfillment of a din d'oraisa. What?
Right.
Well, right. It was. You can't say it's d'oraisa.
Right.
Amar Abaye, Ochal Putisa. A putisa is some type of water bug. Rashi says, Bala sheretz hamayim. You swallow a bug in water, loke arba, you get 4 isurim. Nimala, if you swallow an ant, loke chamesh, mishum sheretz hashoretz ala aretz, a whole bunch of isurim. Tzira. What? Where did you get the number 200?
40 times 200. Yeah.
Yeah. 39 times 5. Right. Yeah. Arba'im chasar achas times 5. I didn't know what you were talking about for a second there. I'm like 40. It said 5, but you weren't talking about the Yisurim. You were talking about the Onshin. Yeah. Correct. Tzira, a hornet or a wasp. Loke sheish. The added one is mishum sheretzo. Amar Avachai, and this is again we're talking about switching gears. Hamasha es nekovav over mishum lo seshaktu. A person who withholds themselves from going to the bathroom violates the isser of lo seshaktu. Where's the pasuk of lo seshaktu from? It's a pasuk in Vayikra. However, we do paskin halacha l'maisa that this isser is an isser derabanan, and we also have parameters to it. If a person withholds going from the bathroom and they're withholding in a way that they know that one way or the other, bathroom or not, they will go to the bathroom within 72 minutes. That is an isur derabanan. At that point, you're not allowed to hold in anymore. When it comes to tefillah, we're even more makbid. If really any desire to go to the bathroom, a person should really stop what they're doing and go to the bathroom. Amar Abibi Barabai, Haiman deshasi bekarna de umna, a person who drinks out of the blood letter straw, ka'avar mishum bal tashaktu. This is also going to be the isur of bal tashaktu. It's interesting because what the Gemara here is playing off of when it talks about Baal Tashaktu is that our Mishnah said shkatzim. It's just an interesting, it's almost poetic license to compare the two because shkatzim are bugs. Shkatzim are they're like small animals. But we're saying lo tashaksu, the Gemara shtup, that it doesn't really belong here. It's not, this is not the place for it. It belongs in brachos with all the sugyas about going to the bathroom. But as we know, the Gemara is not organized by topic. It's just not the way it's structured. Amar Rava, Barav, Barav Huna, Risek, if you grind up Tishan Amalim, Vehevi Echad Chai, and so you have 9 ants, and you bring a 10th one that's alive, and that 10th one is Hishliman Lechazayis. So first of all, you have problems, and second of all, Lokashesh. Chamesh Mishum Beria, 5 Isurim because you ate the one whole ant, the Echad Mishum Kazayis Nevela. Interesting language of Nevela. Where we think nevela is a corpse of a cow, a corpse of it, whatever. So said the Gemara here applies, I didn't know this, the Gemara here applies the rule of nevela to crushed up bugs. This is really where we got into bodek and where we got into all, it's really majorly problematic to just go ahead and eat broccoli that isn't checked. They're infested with bugs. It's really a problem. And I remember many years ago when I was in Eretz Yisrael, and I was like eating, I love sunflower seeds, and every once in a while I'd like catch a bug inside. So I did some research. Do you have to check? It's so infrequent. So what are the percentages? So the poskim talk about bugs and checking for food based on the line in the sand between miut she'eno matsui and miut hamatsui. Miut hamatsui is 6, 7, 8, 9, 10%. Miut she'eno matsui is 1, 2, 3%. They're very uncommon. So these are some of the lines in the sand about checking. And I recently took one of my kids to the doctor about some GI stuff. They said he should eat some raspberries and blackberries. I'm like, it's not so pasha. And I actually told her, I said, I know you're a doctor and I'm sure you see other people from the Jewish community. Like, they're very hard to clean and we have very strict rules about eating bugs. So we just don't eat them that often, blackberries and raspberries. She's like, thank you for telling me that. I'll just give different fruits and vegetables to the Jews. She came up with other options, but she said that raspberries and blackberries were like top shelf in regards to GI tract. Like, not helpful, but thank you. So that's what the Gemara says. Rava Amar Rav Yochanan Afilu Shnayim Vihu. Even if it was only 2 and that 1, it would still be problematic. Rabbi Yosef Amar Afilu Echad Vihu. Even if it was 1 kizayis and 1 bug, v'lo pligi habirav ravi habazutri. We're only talking about the size of the bugs as it relates to the kizayis shiur. I didn't daven Marib yet, which is going to be problematic. We'll have to stop shortly. Ochal tevel u'maiser rishon amarav. Ochal tevel shel maiser oni loke. If a person ate tevel and the only thing that was lacking was maiser oni, but you still ate that tevel, the halacha is loke. Kiman. Whose shita is this like? Ki hai tana detanya, like the following brisa. Amar Rabbi Yossi. Yochel lo yehei chayev ela al tevel shelo hura mimenu kol ikr. Maybe the only type of tevel you're going to be chayev Makkos on is tevel that's completely untithed from all the various things that we typically tithe with. Hura mimenu truma gedola, velo hura mimenu meiser rishon, or meiser rishon velo meiser sheni, ve'afilu meiser ani minai. How do we know that even the only thing that is missing is meiser ani? That minai you're going to still be chayev in Makkos, like Rav says a few lines earlier. Talmud lomar lo sucha le'echol bisharecha. Gomer, ulahalan hu omer ve'achlu b'sharecha b'saveyu. Ma'lahalan, just like the latter pasuk is talking about meiser ani, afkan meiser ani v'amar achmana lo sucha. So that's a lav. So therefore, we see that there's going to be a chiyuv malkos. We'll have to stop right here because this next piece is going to jump into some bigger sugyas. So we're going to stop at Amar of Yosef, 3 lines from the bottom of Tezayin and Beis. We'll do our best to catch up over Shabbos and over Sunday. Wishing you all a beautiful night.